You may have noticed that the Republican-controlled House passed Donald Trump's budget on Tuesday night, which many people touted as a really big deal, really big deal. Here's the thing. It's actually a much less big deal than you think because it doesn't do what you probably think. So I have four ways that this bill does not implement Donald Trump's financial vision for the country. Okay, here we go. Way number one, okay? This is a blueprint, not an actual bill. There's no policy prescriptions in this bill that the House passed 217 votes to 215 votes. Nothing. It's just a bunch of numbers on what they're going to broadly spend and what they're going to broadly cut. It doesn't explain what they're going to spend on or what they're going to cut. It just is a bunch of numbers, quite literally. Like, it is a numbers framework. It is not like we're going to do this, we're going to implement it this way, we're going to do it. There's none of that. It really is like the broadest of outlines, and I feel like that gets lost big time in the coverage. So, blueprint, not a broad blueprint, not a clear strategic map. That's one. Number two, there are two chambers in Congress. You may have heard of this. The U.S. Senate is also Republican-controlled, but the U.S. Senate is not on board with what the House is doing. The Senate, a week ago, passed a budget bill, that included spending for national security and immigration, Donald Trump's national security priorities and immigration priorities. There was nothing in that bill about the Donald Trump tax cut, extending the Trump tax cut from 2017, anything else, just national security and immigration. The Senate's plan is to try to do this in two bills, not one big, beautiful bill, in the words of Donald Trump. Two bills. So one on national security and immigration that they think they can move relatively quickly, and the other on all the rest of the stuff that they will do later on. The House has one bill. This is the bill that they passed on Tuesday night. But again, the Senate is not just going to take the House's bill. The House is not just going to take the Senate's bill. They are going to have to figure out a way to combine them, in theory, or do two bills, or combine them into one. And then that combined bill will come up for another vote in the House and in the Senate. So this is a guarantee of absolutely nothing at this point, to be very clear. Congratulations, you waited all this time and you got nothing. I mean, essentially, this is an attempt to say the Republicans are behind Donald Trump's budget priorities extremely broadly. But in terms of things actually happening, the Senate and the House are not aligned. Even though they're both Republican-controlled, they are not aligned on what should happen next. And they're going to have to not just get aligned, the leadership figure that out, but they're then going to have to convince the rank-and-file Republicans to all vote for it. And that's going to be a problem, particularly in the House, where they have like a two-seat majority. So if they lose anyone on the Republican side, they basically lose the vote because no Democrats are voting for it. All right, so that's the first two. Number one, it's a broad blueprint, not an actual policy prescription. Number two, the Senate and the House don't agree. Let me take a minute here to say, if you want analysis like this, which is calling balls and strikes no matter what uniform the batter at the plate is wearing, nonpartisan, independent, authentic, transparent, explaining to you how Washington really works as opposed to how I think the two parties want you to think it works, that's me. All right, so let's keep going. As I said, I had four reasons why this Republican budget bill is less than meets the eye. All right, so number one is it's a broad blueprint. It's not an actual bill in any meaningful way. Number two is the House and the Senate don't agree. Number three, this goes back to a point I made in number one, which is there is $880 billion in the House bill that seems as though the way that Republicans would get to that number of cuts would be to make major league cuts in Medicaid, which is the healthcare program for uninsured and low-income folks. Okay, now, that is a gigantic political non-starter. People do not want that cut. It's a popular program. In a lot of swing districts that Republican House members represent, there are a lot of Medicaid recipients in it. So to say we're cutting back your benefits or we're taking away your benefits entirely is something that's not going to go over well. It's one of the reasons that it was really hard for Speaker Mike Johnson to get a bunch of moderates and swing district Republicans on board with this, because they were worried about, where's that $880 billion in cuts going to come from if not from Medicaid? And the basic answer from the Republican leadership is, we'll work it out. It's going to be fine. Now, Donald Trump has said he's not cutting Medicaid. And in fact, through aides, essentially said after the House passed the bill on Tuesday night, the Senate better strip out the Medicaid stuff. Okay, but here's the problem. $880 billion has to come in savings, has to come from somewhere. If you are not cutting $880 billion, there's going to be a lot of fiscal conservatism in the House who are not going to vote for whatever this bill finally winds up looking like. And Republicans say, well, we'll find waste, fraud, and abuse. $880 billion worth of waste, fraud, and abuse? And that's the problem, right? If we're talking about the federal budget broadly, here's the deal. Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and defense spending. Those four things account for 86% of the budget. And Donald Trump has said he's not going to touch any of those four things. So really, we're talking about, they're trying to cut among 14% of the budget that Donald Trump says it's okay to cut among. So there's $880 billion that's either going to come out of Medicaid, which is a gigantic political problem for a lot of people in swing states, and Donald Trump has said he doesn't want to do, or they have to find $880 billion somewhere else if they are going to get conservatives on board to pass this. Big problem. Now, the final point. This is, in theory, Republicans, right, want smaller, they want to reduce the debt, the national debt, which is at $36 trillion. Here's the problem. What is just in the numbers, what is in the bill that the House passed, and again, it's just a bunch of numbers, what is in there is a whole heck of a lot of spending, including on extending Donald Trump's tax cuts and adding no taxes on tips. Remember, he proposed that during the campaign, which would add even more money, and vague talk about where they're going to cut, like the $880 billion. There are some estimates, you ready for this, that over the next 10 years, if the numbers in the House bill passed, and again, they're not going to, it's going to be negotiated, but if this blueprint passed, it would add $11.25 trillion to the national debt, which I remind you is already $36 trillion. So the idea that this is sort of some fiscally responsible plan is just not borne out, right? So much less than meets the eye here. This bill, if it winds up ultimately passing, probably won't look exactly like this. And there are a whole lot of questions, particularly on cutting spending, that Republicans are going to have to answer. And I can tell you, folks, there's no easy answer to it. Okay, that's it for me. As always, I ask you to do a few things. I ask you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't. Easiest thing you can do. I ask you to like this video if you like this video, if you like this content, if you want more of this content to come. I'll ask you to comment on this video because the algorithm rewards engagement, subscribers, and likes. And we need to have the algorithm push me and my content to more people so I can make more content like this. And lastly, I ask you to do something that you can do in your own life, which is tell some of your friends about what I'm doing here. Tell people who are interested in this sort of stuff, interested in getting politics explained to them, how Washington really works, from an independent journalist who spent 20 plus years in mainstream media. If all that appeals to you, I hope you tell someone else about it. Tell several someones. All right, take care.